The laughter started as a whisper behind crystal glasses and diamond smiles, but it spread quickly, sharp as a blade wrapped in silk. Jonathan had sent the invitation on a reckless impulse, a smirk tugging at his lips as he typed her name. He never imagined she would actually come. And if she did, he certainly never imagined she would arrive like that. Imagine for a moment that you were her. That your entire life had been measured in hourly wages and second-hand uniforms, that your hands smelled of bleach while others wore perfume worth more than your monthly rent. If someone invited you into a world that had always looked down on you, would you go? Would you risk being laughed at just to prove you belonged? Jonathan Pierce was known across Manhattan's Upper East Side for two things: ruthless business instincts and extravagant charity galas. At 38, he had built a real estate empire that towered over the city skyline. His penthouse overlooked Central Park, and his name regularly appeared in glossy magazines beside politicians and celebrities. But beneath the polished suits and million-dollar smile was a man who had long ago forgotten what it felt like to struggle. Margaret had worked in his townhouse for nearly 4 years. She arrived every morning before sunrise from a cramped apartment in Queens, taking 2 buses and a train. Her mother, Evelyn, had once been a nurse, but after a stroke left her partially paralyzed. Margaret became the sole provider. Hospital bills stacked up like unpaid prayers. Still, Margaret carried herself with quiet dignity. She cleaned Jonathan's marble floors, polished his chandeliers, and carefully dusted the photographs of a family he rarely visited. Jonathan barely noticed her. To him, she was part of the house, like the antique piano or the imported rugs. He knew she was dependable, quiet, and invisible. The gala that year was his biggest yet, hosted in a grand ballroom near Fifth Avenue. Politicians, investors, and socialites filled the guest list. The theme was a night of royal elegance, and guests were encouraged to dress like modern nobility. Jonathan had been sipping whiskey in his office when his friend Michael joked that he should invite someone completely out of place to make the night interesting. That was when Margaret's name came to mind. He told himself it would be harmless. A joke. A story to laugh about later. He handed her the invitation casually that afternoon, his tone light, almost mocking. He expected her to decline politely. Instead, she took the envelope with trembling fingers and whispered a simple thank you. What Jonathan did not know was that Margaret went home and cried that night. Not because she felt humiliated, but because no one had ever invited her anywhere grand. She sat beside her mother's bed, holding the gold-embossed card, her heart torn between fear and longing. Evelyn, her speech slow but eyes still bright, told her to go. She told her that sometimes God opens doors in strange ways. Margaret had no gown, no jewelry, no savings for luxury. But she had something stronger than pride: she had resilience. She took extra shifts at a diner for 2 weeks. She sold a bracelet her father had given her before he passed. And when that still was not enough, a co-worker named Rebecca offered her a navy evening dress she had once worn to a cousin's wedding. It was simple but elegant, with a subtle shimmer that caught the light like midnight stars. On the night of the gala, Jonathan stepped onto the red carpet beneath flashing cameras. His tailored tuxedo fit perfectly, his hair styled with effortless precision. He greeted donors, shook hands, and posed for photographs. Inside, the ballroom glowed with chandeliers and gold-trimmed mirrors. The air smelled of roses and expensive cologne. Then the doors opened. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Heads turned. Margaret stood at the entrance, transformed. The navy gown embraced her figure gracefully, flowing down like liquid velvet. Rebecca had helped style her hair into soft waves that framed her delicate features. A borrowed pair of silver heels added height, and a modest pendant rested against her collarbone. She wasn't just dressed well. She carried herself like someone who knew her worth. The room fell into a silence so thick it felt sacred. Jonathan's breath caught. For a moment, he did not recognize her. The woman who scrubbed his kitchen counters now looked like she had stepped out of a Renaissance painting. People stared, not with mockery, but with awe. And something inside him shifted. Margaret walked forward slowly, aware of every pair of eyes. She felt the weight of their assumptions pressing against her skin. But she also felt her mother's words echoing in her heart. She had spent years shrinking herself to fit into the corners of other people's lives. Tonight, she refused to shrink. If you were Jonathan in that moment, what would you feel? Pride in your cruel joke? Or shame as you realized you had underestimated someone's quiet strength? Michael leaned toward Jonathan, whispering something under his breath, but Jonathan barely heard him. His mind replayed every dismissive glance he had given her over the years. Every time he had spoken about success as if it were only about money. He suddenly saw the invisible labor behind his spotless home. The early mornings. The tired eyes she tried to hide. Margaret did not cling to the walls or search for a corner. She moved with grace, greeting guests who introduced themselves, speaking softly but confidently. She talked about caring for her mother, about working 2 jobs, about believing that hardship could carve strength into a person's soul. There was no bitterness in her voice, only honesty. People listened. A philanthropist named Thomas asked about her mother's condition. A city councilwoman named Victoria expressed admiration for her dedication. The more she spoke, the clearer it became that Margaret possessed something rare in that glittering room: authenticity. Jonathan felt exposed. For the first time in years, he questioned himself. He had built towers of glass and steel, but he had neglected the foundation of empathy. He approached her slowly, guilt tightening his chest. Margaret met his eyes, and for a second, he expected anger. Instead, he saw calm understanding. She knew why he had invited her. She knew she had been the joke. But she also knew something he was only beginning to learn: sometimes the ones meant to be humiliated rise higher than anyone expects. The rest of the evening unfolded differently than Jonathan had planned. Instead of laughter behind closed doors, there was admiration. Instead of whispers, there were invitations to future events. By the time the orchestra played its final note, Margaret had received offers for community support for her mother and even a part-time administrative position at a nonprofit. Jonathan stood alone near the balcony, watching the city lights flicker below. He felt smaller than he ever had, despite his wealth. Success without compassion suddenly felt hollow. In the weeks that followed, Jonathan changed. Not in dramatic headlines or public declarations, but in quiet actions. He increased Margaret's salary. He arranged medical consultations for Evelyn. He began visiting the properties his company developed in lower-income neighborhoods, listening instead of dictating. Margaret continued to work hard, but she no longer walked with bowed shoulders. She enrolled in evening classes, determined to study healthcare administration. Her life did not transform overnight, but hope replaced exhaustion. Before this story ends, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done if you were in Margaret's place that night. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge is not humiliation. It is grace. It is walking into a room that expected you to fail and shining so brightly that even the cruelest heart is forced to see its reflection. Years later, when people spoke about that gala, they did not remember the champagne or the gowns. They remembered the night a millionaire learned humility from the woman he underestimated. They remembered the way she walked in like royalty, not because of the dress she wore, but because of the strength she carried. And somewhere in Queens, in a small apartment filled with laughter instead of fear, Margaret would look at her mother and whisper a silent thank you for telling her to step through that door. If this story truly touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe so more people can be reminded that kindness and second chances still matter.